It's Thursday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster.
Please welcome Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party.
Keir Starmer sets out the first steps he would take if Labour wins the election.
Here we are. One card, 6 steps, in your hand, a plan to change the country.
And who will be the Labour candidate in Jeremy Corbyn's North London seat?
Today, we have taken decisive action to reduce legal migration with our 5-point plan. Enough is enough.
That was 6 months ago. Is that pledge going to be delivered? The government publishes its guidance on how schools in England should approach sex education.
When we did the review, there were lots of teachers and head teachers saying more clarity is required here in terms of age appropriateness. So we've responded to that.
Joining me to discuss all that, Labour MP and frontbencher Dame Angela Eagle, Conservative peer and former Minister James Bethell, Lucy Harris, Director of the Growth Commission think tank and a former Brexit Party MEP, and author and journalist Owen Jones. This is Politics Live. Let's start with this story in the Financial Times. The headline says Berlin explores tax breaks to get Germans working longer hours. It's reported to be part of the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz's growth plan that aims to make working longer hours more rewarding. Should we encourage people to work longer to grow the economy here, Angela?
Well, I think you have to look at what the German Chancellor is doing in the context of the German economy, and you have to remember to begin with that working hours in Germany are far less than we work some of the longest hours in Europe.
But not very productively.
Well, that's a slightly different issue. That's about investment and machinery and plant and having new innovation. But I think at the margins, if you've got more hours that you can work, you can get some more productivity by encouraging people to work longer there. But if there's more work to be done, you need to create new jobs and make sure that you equip people to do those jobs with the right skills and training. So it may be something that's appropriate in Germany. And it's certainly the case that if you look at any economy, reforming the labour market to give a better deal for workers, which is what the Labour Party is going to do, is the way that you can improve productivity.
All right, on principle, what do you think of the idea? Of course, the German economy isn't the same as the UK economy, but this idea of giving tax breaks to people to encourage them to work longer hours?
It's a good idea. I mean, if you want to make more money, you need to work longer and harder. We've got a massive productivity problem in this country. 280,000 people have dropped out of the workforce altogether due to poor health, and that's costing us £60 billion a year that we can't afford. If we don't find more people to put in full week's work, then we're not going to be able to afford the country we live in at the moment.
Well, maybe deal with NHS waiting lists then.
I don't think it's just about waiting lists. I think it's also about the environment in which we live in, which is not encouraging good health. I think it's not giving people the power and the choices to lead healthy lives. And I think it's also a bit about some personal decisions, about people trying to commit themselves to looking after themselves. It's a complicated matter, but you are right that health is at the centre of it.
Lucy, you're the director of the Growth Commission that was set up by Liz Truss, the former Conservative Prime Minister. What do you think of this as an idea to get people, Germans, working longer hours, to give them tax breaks?
Yeah, well, I mean, we've said in our most recent growth budget that we should be doing tax breaks, and it's not necessarily a more general thing. We do have a mix of different taxes like unfreezing tax allowances, but we've also got abolishing inheritance tax, which we want to focus on retired people who we want to get back into the workplace because we think that they would increase growth in the economy. So it's about incentivising different sections of society to get back to work. And like James said, it's also about accounting for those who are sick as well.
Owen.
We've got Liz Truss's crew here to recommend how we put growth in the economy. That went a treat last time. I think everyone looking at their soaring mortgages and rents can remember how those ideas went. In Germany, they've got a problem with underinvestment. Part of the problem is Angela Merkel pushed for a debt brake, which prevents them investing in their economy. So then they shift on to blaming workers instead.
Well, is this a better idea then?
Well, no. I mean, if you look at this country, each year, the TUC, Trade Union Congress, they do an estimate of how much unpaid overtime workers do. It's worth about £30 billion a year. So people are already overworked. The word productivity is quite useful to mislead people because it makes people think it's how much workers are putting in. But actually, that's not the proper definition of productivity.
It's about being productive.
Well, if you look at Britain since 2010, we've had a productivity crisis since this guy, Lord Bethel's crew, have been in power, which has massively accelerated. That's not because workers started slacking when they came to power. For a start, it's quite interesting. Rishi Sunak critiqued the cuts to corporation tax because he said what happened is companies got all the extra money and sat on it rather than investing it in those companies, and that's an example. You modernise companies, you invest in new machinery, in new technology. Companies have failed to do that in this country. So I think the problem isn't overworked workers, it's investment, and that's a crisis of private and public investment.
And skills training as well.
Let James come back and I'll get you.
Absolutely.
Skills are very important, but listen, we've got a problem that a lot of people are leaving the workforce altogether in their 50s, 60s, at a time when people are also living longer. That is just unsustainable if we're going to keep paying our bills as a country. We've got to keep people in the workforce for a longer period in their life. And by the way, people live longer if they are working. It is good for people, for their mental health, for their physical health, for their sense of mission.
If they're in good work.
And therefore, if their health is good enough, then they should be encouraged to work. So I think that the idea of tax breaks for people, either later in life or for their overtime, are the kinds of sensible measures we should be taking.
Right, encouraging more people back into the workforce. What's wrong with that in general?
Well, I mean, it depends on the people we're talking about. There are people with ill health when it isn't appropriate to send them back into the workplace. And I think that's my fear with the government's policies.
And do you think there are some who perhaps could be encouraged back to work and actually
we don't have a functioning National Health Service in this country, so we have lots of people with health conditions who aren't being properly supported and treated, and that's the problem with what they've done there. Just quickly, though, if you increase the amount of time people work, that hits working class people more because the poorer you are, the less you live and the less your health your life is. And the second point is, if you look at the 4-day week, if you look at the
have a conversation, don't shout.
If you look at the promotion of the 4-day week, which actually Germany in place have been trialling, that finds actually productivity goes up often when you decrease people's working hours. They do more, and actually their well-being is improved.
I think it's also about the quality of work. At the moment, we've got a lot of people who have fragmented contracts, who are working and yet all the hours that they can and still not earning enough money to get out of poverty. So it's about quality of work and being able to improve your prospects by working as well.
Just finally, Lucy, before we move on then. Did you want to say something?
Well, yeah, I think we should also be looking at public sector productivity as well, and that's a significant issue in this country. And it means that from our overspend, I think it was £192 billion that this country has spent on civil servants, with a lower 6.7% of productivity in the last year, means since COVID, it means that we need to find a different way of managing how we do things on the public sector as well.
Although it did expand, of course, under COVID
absolutely.
During the pandemic.
And how we can do that is freezing budgets, which would allow for a lot of these tax breaks.
Let's look at some of the suggestions from Labour, from the Labour leader, because there's been a big launch today with the party talking about its core messages ahead of an upcoming general election campaign. It was at an event in Essex, and Sir Keir Starmer set out what he describes as his first steps for government. Let's have a look at how the papers have been covering it. The Times. Starmer sets out to woo voters with 6 pledges. It does say underneath, no new policies, but a vow to control borders. And then the Mirror. Keir to Mirror readers, you can see there the 6 steps. My 6 fixes for Britain. Well, let's show you how Labour have demonstrated those 6 steps. There we are. Deliver economic stability, cut NHS waiting times, launch a new border security command, set up Great British Energy, crack down on antisocial behaviour and recruit 6,500 new teachers. And there is Keir Starmer with his sleeves rolled up and ready to go. Let's take a listen to some of his speech.
This is a message that we can take to every doorstep across the country. Every doorstep across the country. And make that argument. Decline is not inevitable. Politics can make a difference. Britain will have a better future, and you can choose it with Labour. Stop the chaos with Labour. Turn the page with Labour. Return politics to service with Labour. And with patience, with determination, with these first steps, we can rebuild our country with Labour.
Angela, will Labour change everyday people's lives?
Yes, I mean, that's the whole point of Labour Party being created, and these are the first steps, illustrative steps, which will make a real difference in day-to-day people's experience of the way our country works. So, for example, cut NHS waiting lists. We've said 40,000 more appointments in the NHS each week. That will mean that we can start tackling some of the things that we were talking about with people waiting with long-term conditions to get treatment.
All right.
For example, cracking down on antisocial behaviour, recruiting 6,500 more teachers.
We know what they say. We know what they say. But will it really amount to fundamental change? Do you think it will? Will Labour change people's lives?
Well, I don't know, but I am disappointed by the vapid nature of these pledges. Take the health pledge, reducing waiting lists. Angela is just not right to think that those GP appointments are going to make any dent on waiting lists at all. And that's a meaningless commitment if it's not supported by a comprehensive public health programme.
He says first step. These are first steps.
Yes, of course.
But that's an outcome. You get a reduction in the waiting list once you've addressed a load of quite complicated matters. And therefore presenting this as though it was a click of the fingers, snappy thing that they're going to do in the first few days gives me the feeling that this agenda is being run by pollsters rather than by thoughtful politicians.
I mean, these are illustrative of the missions that Keir Starmer set out, which he is talking about taking 10 years to bring into effect.
2 terms.
There is absolutely no view that you can wave a magic wand and everything's going to be hunky-dory. But what we have to do is get away from 14 years of chaos and incompetence with the Conservative Party, a party that's more interested in changing the Prime Minister than changing the country, obsessed with its own internal politics,
but
and have some coherent, competent government.
Is that the problem, Angela? You're relying too much on people having fallen out of love, if they ever were in love with the Conservatives, rather than setting out something that looks like it will deliver the change that you set out.
There'll be a manifesto. These pledges are the first steps. They're not the entirety of the manifesto, and they're illustrative of the changes that we'll make in issues that really people care about. So setting up GB Energy, for example, to ensure that we can have more security in our energy system, that it'll be clean, that we can keep prices down, that would make a real change to every person up and down this country.
I think that we are deluding ourselves to think that anything is going to change necessarily, because the issues are still the same. We still have planning problems that are still the same, which means we don't have cheaper energy because we can't build. We still have housing issues because we can't build.
Yeah, we're going to reform the planning system and we're going to build more houses.
What are you going to do?
We are going to reform the planning system so that we get...
Well,
we're not going to have...
We
are not going to have a load of NIMBY backbenchers who go behind their back into Downing Street and stop change happening. We are going to get house building working in this country. We're going to ensure that we deal with some of the shortages of basic things like houses and the right place to live.
Well, we'll come back to your neighbour. But Lucy, are you saying that none of this is going to make any difference?
The system overall needs to be completely reviewed.
But this
we have judicial.
Yeah, well, I was going to say that is what Liz Truss.
We have judicial reviews which prevent planning applications, and they prevent big energy structures that we need to be built. We have many different areas within planning that prevent environmental things from happening, say wind farms, solar farms, anything that you might like or would like to see with these 5 pledges.
Solar power on land for years.
Let me bring in Owen, because Owen, looking at this, could be the first Labour government being elected since 2005. Is this going to deliver change?
No. Firstly, there's a question of trust. There's a reason he's not calling these pledges, because that would remind everyone of the pledges he made when he became leader of the Labour Party: public ownership of utilities, taxing the rich in order to invest, scrapping tuition fees, ending private sector.
But he's done that already.
He's
done that already. So you're saying people won't trust?
Yeah, I'm saying if a politician with that record of dishonesty, U-turning, I mean, again, £28 billion a year clean investment fund, that he scrapped as well. But the other point is, this doesn't even scratch the surface. Take the pledge he's made on teachers. That amounts to every school in the country getting 0.2 new teachers. a 2% rise in NHS appointments. The problem with what Labour's done is they've firstly backed a fiscal rule, which they have taken from the Conservatives, which means they can't have new investment, backed by the fact they won't increase taxes on those who are booming like never before. So they can't invest in these public services. The other point is, and this is, I think, gets to the core, Angela mentioned why the Labour Party was founded. And it was founded in order to represent working people and those who are struggling. New Labour, for all my problems with New Labour, which we could have a whole programme on, they had an anti-poverty measure, a flagship anti-poverty measure, the minimum wage. This Labour Party has not a single anti-poverty measure, and if it gets worse, it gets worse than that. They support the two-child benefit cap, which drives children into poverty.
The minimum wage wasn't in New Labour's 5 pledges, but we did it when we were in government. These are steps that we're going to take. They're not the entirety of the programme. And if you don't think that Labour is going to make a difference and you're anti-Conservative, then what are you actually saying about what should happen at the next election? That you're happy to keep the Conservatives in power? Because the choice will be between a Conservative government and a Labour government.
I think the first point I'd make is the minimum wage. That was Labour policy years before the 1997 election. It's not true they unveiled that in 1997.
But, Owen,
it was policy for years.
Answer that question about what you want to happen.
Labour's going to win the next election. By hold on, Angela. Hi. Can I answer this? The Conservatives have trashed themselves and they've destroyed themselves as a party.
So you think it's safe to criticise the Labour Party
because the problem at the moment is all the pressure in politics is coming from those who think we should blame migrants for all our problems, that we should cut taxes on the rich. And we need pressure on the Labour Party from those who think we need to increase taxes on the well-off, which Keir Starmer promised and reneged on, investing in public services.
To be honest, Owen, I'd welcome pressure on the Labour Party when we're in government, but I think that you've rather taken for granted the next win. Remember that Jeremy Corbyn left us with the worst election result we've had since 1935. I have had to spend the last few years sat in the House of Commons. At the beginning of the Parliament, it's less so now, there were 164 more Conservative MPs than there were Labour MPs. And we have got a mountain to climb to win the next election. Polls are looking good, but we've got to deliver the deal.
Can I answer that quickly?
Very happy, Owen, for you to put pressure on the Labour government when we've got one, but you mustn't assume we're going to get one if you go around saying our leader is dishonest.
This is absolutely hilarious. The idea that you should abandon pressure when you have leverage. The fact is...
What leverage have you got, Owen? You've left the Labour Party.
Well, because I can argue for people to vote elsewhere in order to put pressure on the Labour Party to actually stand up for the things that Keir Starmer originally promised in the first place.
But I'll come to that, actually, in a minute. Owen has a point, though, on increasing taxes.
Owen has many points.
He does.
Thank you, Angela. I'm glad finally we have too many consensus. Wisdom emerges on the panel.
The issue of trust and Keir Starmer dropping and changing policies, policies that could fund the sorts of transformational change that many people within Labour would like to see. So increasing taxes, borrowing to invest way beyond.
I don't think he has dropped promises.
Well, he has dropped those two.
Look, I think first of all, he's not an ideologue, he's a pragmatist. And when he made the pledges that Owen was talking about, that was pre-pandemic, pre-war in Europe, pre a range of issues. So you have to have pledges and first steps, whatever you want to call them.
The top 5% of earners.
A manifesto. You have to create a manifesto that's for the times we're in now, not for the times that were happening in 2019, especially after we had...
I have to answer this. I have to answer this, because this is illustrative.
Well, I haven't finished yet.
But it's illustrative of how dishonesty is contagious in politics.
Oh.
Keir Starmer...
Cheers.
It's true.
Owen.
This is true.
No, there's a difference between being an ideologue and
let me give you an example. Let me give you an example. When Keir Starmer was standing to be leader of the Labour Party, he told your former colleague, Andrew Neil, that nationalisation of all the utilities was going to be the next manifesto. He then told Laura Kuenssberg 2 years later that he had never supported nationalisation. Now, if Boris Johnson had done something similar, you would quite correctly be denouncing him for dishonesty. Not because he's your guy.
We're going to take rail into public ownership. We're looking at what to do with some of the other failing utilities as well. I think you should have a little bit more optimism about what Labour government can deliver than you're saying.
Let me pick up on something else that Owen said, which is that Labour are going to win the next election. They're going to win it, and they're going to win it big. Whether it's as big, yes, he says, whether it's going to be, and then he's left the party. Whether it's going to be, whether, well, I'll come back
He's
to that
left
in a
the
minute.
party so he can tell people not to vote Labour.
Do you agree?
I don't completely agree. Listen, I can see the polls as everyone else can.
Yeah.
I go out and about. You can tell what the mood in the nation is. But I was also working at the Sunday Times in 1992, and it felt very much like then. It felt like a slam dunk for Labour, and then suddenly it all slightly went different. And there was a question of trust. Kinnock came across badly, and then the nation slightly thought that maybe John Major had a point. You're kind of getting that on Sunak a bit.
Are you?
Well, today's migration figures are going to make a lot of people think maybe he's got a point.
All right. Well, let's have a look. Yes, Lucy, I'm going to ask you to comment on this. Labour's first steps for change. We've gone through them all, but let's focus on the economic one. Deliver economic stability with tough spending rules so we can grow our economy and keep taxes, inflation and mortgages as low as possible. Can you sign up to that?
So, well, I want to know what I'm actually signing up to for once, because I haven't actually seen what that economic stability and the spending rules he's talking about. As far as I'm concerned, you would have to start to freeze budgets to be able to afford any fiscal headroom for anything that he's suggesting that he would like to spend his money on. We already know that they've dropped 28 billion. We already know they've dropped the 28 billion pledge to their green programme because they can't afford it. And they are in the similar situation to the Conservative Party. Where we're going to get the money from is questionable. We can't, print more money because we'll end up in further inflationary situation, and we can't increase our debt. So where does he go? And I think that's the current question that he's grappling with and the Labour Party are grappling with. And I suppose in a similar sense, the Conservative Party is also grappling with.
Obviously they're learning the lesson to some extent of what happened under Liz Truss and Kwasi Kwarteng and the mini budget with £45 billion worth of unfunded tax cuts. You can't do these things out of thin air because markets crash and our currency.
I think you need to project into the future, and that's precisely what we do at the Growth Budget, the Growth Commission. We look at certain policies, and through our modelling, we can see what the policy will have an effect on GDP per capita from 10, 20 years into the future. And that's how we can start to look at what is possible and what is viable when we're looking at budgets and when we're looking at economic plans.
Well, with economic modelling, it depends on the economic assumptions that you've written into the model, and I presume it'll be a neoliberal economic assumption that you have to cut the public sector as much as possible, which is what you've been talking about, and somehow that if you give people tax cuts, growth will automatically
but we're
come
interested in the model.
That is precisely what Liz Truss decided to do.
If you're interested, we can certainly give you a rundown and let you know how it's put together. The model that we actually run takes into a lot of different things into account. We actually measure regulation, which is the biggest issue we currently have in this country in terms of how we grow the economy. We did a budget and we worked out that we would grow the economy by 2044 by 6.4% if we got our planning rules correct.
And why should people trust what you have done?
Well, I think it's looking at how our modelling works. Our modelling is, we've written it with a collection of 13 commissioners and economists from across the world. We have multiple ones
all have the same ideological bent, I expect.
Some of them have different opinions, and that's why we are a commission. We have different opinions feeding into the commission. We've recently produced a report by Naohiro Yashiro, which is a Japanese commissioner who's written about the demographic changes in the West and what we can do. It does have some policies that you might sign up to, Angela, getting women back into work, and incentivising women who have been
if you're getting women back into work, you have to facilitate them getting back into work by having
your job.
All right, let's go back.
Childcare, and that is, by the way, public expenditure, which you're against.
Let me just show you this headline. Jeremy Corbyn, Labour to select candidate for Islington North seat. This has been a bit of a saga with Jeremy Corbyn, the former leader of the Labour Party, sitting as an independent, wants to stand again as a Labour candidate in the seat that he has represented for quite some time. Will he be able to do that, Angela?
No.
No. Would you persuade him to still stand for the Labour Party, bearing in mind you've cancelled your membership of the party?
No, he should. Of course, he should. His local party wants him to be their candidate.
Right.
They nearly unanimously voted for him to be their candidate. Yeah. The Labour leadership is banning them from allowing him to be the candidate for the party.
But you've said the Labour Party is in my blood. Here's why I've just cancelled my membership. wouldn't he also have greater leverage outside of the party as
Yeah,
an
I agree.
independent?
That's why, he should stand as an independent.
Oh, right, as an independent.
No,
You're not encouraging him to stand as a Labour
He absolutely
candidate.
will stand as an independent. Look, Keir Starmer, when he ran for leader, said that any local parties must have the right to choose their own candidates. Another example of his pledges burned to death. This is a Labour Party now, which is for Natalie Elphicke. She's one of the most right-wing Conservative MPs. She intervened to help her sexual predator husband. That's the Labour Party today. A woman who stood up over and over again, bashed migrants, bashed trade unions.
But let me put that...
But on this point about the point about why I left, I think you keep bringing it up and then just dismissing it without talking about the reasons.
No, I
and
don't
it's all very funny
it.
and all the rest of it. The point is, at the moment, if you believe in things like taxing the rich in order to invest, if you believe in opposing war crimes, Labour thinks that you'll just vote for them whatever. They don't need to listen to you and they don't need to cater any of their policies for you. But Labour have to fight for those votes. My view is Labour will come to power because of their dishonesty and because of their failure to have answers to the country's problems. They will be a burning skip.
All right.
They will fall apart and then the far right will fill the vacuum. And I want the left, people who believe in things like taxing the rich to invest in our collapsing public services, to fill that void instead.
Yeah, but hang on. I mean, you've just said you're pretty sure Labour are going to win the election, come what may. Do you think Keir Starmer's the most right-wing Labour leader, then, in recent history?
Yes, actually, because if I look back again to take New Labour back in 1997, again, before 1997, before that election, they had an anti-poverty measure, the minimum wage. Keir Starmer backs a two-child benefit cap, which now puts him to the right of Suella Braverman, which plunges it imposes the evil, the social evil of poverty on little children. And that devastates their lives, and it devastates their future, and it devastates the country as well.
He's more
pro-poverty. It's ridiculous.
He's more right-wing than Tony Blair.
No, listen, I mean, the thing is that we have to persuade the country that we can come into government and run things properly. And we have to, therefore, we're held to a higher standard than the Conservatives. We have to cost the programme that we're going to run the country with. And we are always under far more scrutiny than anybody else.
So kids in poverty should pay the price
Hang on, let her finish.
Well, what are you going to do to lift them out of poverty? You support driving children into poverty.
Shouting across the table, you know. Let her answer.
If you look at our record in government, you will see that we cut child poverty when we were last in government, and I am convinced we will do it again.
How?
We have values.
How?
Listen, Owen, I don't have
values don't pay the bills. Values don't drag children out of poverty.
I will come back to you, but let her finish her point.
We have a proud record of establishing organisations like the Health Service, strengthening the social security system, making our society better. Whenever Labour governments come into government, that is what they do. They help those that need help the most, including getting children out of poverty. We have a very proud record, when I was last in government, of doing precisely that.
But
if Owen is going to be that negative, that's up to him. But I believe that at the end of a period of Labour government, child poverty will be down, opportunities for ordinary people will be greater, and we'll have a better, more balanced growth than we have had with 14 years of failing, chaotic,
there's a commitment.
Incompetent, Conservative.
There is a commitment. There is another difference, Owen, that the economy was in a more benign state when Labour took over in 1997 than now, which I think you would agree broadly. But do you trust what Angela says? Well, coming back to your issue that you don't think Keir Starmer has been trustworthy, do you trust that she'll do
It is absurd to say that we will lift kids out of poverty because look what we did in the past. I mean, she actually mentioned there, alluded to the 1945 Labour government, which did introduce the National Health Service when the country had literally been bombed to rubble by the Nazis.
Exactly. That's why we'll do better than your
Angela, with all due respect, Keir Starmer is not Clement Attlee, and the Labour have literally, with the fiscal rule they have, meant that they cannot invest in these services. The point about kids in poverty is a crucial one. It should be the core of what the Labour Party is about, OK? Kids in poverty. Yeah. And if you support the two-child benefit cap, then you support driving kids, hundreds of thousands of them, into poverty.
Well, let's see what the
you can't say, look at our past record. You have to say how you're going to lift kids out of poverty.
Conservatives? Do you not care about this sort of stuff?
I care about it greatly, but what I'm most struck by this discussion is that today Keir Starmer is trying to project the idea that he's a solid proposition for the electorate. But this discussion is showing how divided Labour really is.
He's not in the party.
He's not in the Labour Party.
Not my problem anymore.
He's not in the Labour Party.
All right, he represents
you must know the difference between Owen Jones and the Labour Party.
He represents views, Angela, that are very, very strong in your party.
Oh,
Yeah,
and
you
you
don't
don't
think
think
they're
one
in the Labour
party?
This discussion that has alluded to...
Of course they do, but
that has alluded to
look
foreign
at
affairs.
your record.
Look
at your record.
It has alluded to
you
foreign
ended
affairs.
Short Start. You've driven millions of
Angela, I said to Owen not to talk over you. Don't talk over James.
I think that the idea that Keir Starmer is not going to have turmoil on his benches is for the fairies. And you asked me whether I thought that it was a slam dunk for Labour in the next election. No, I think the electorate are going to wake up to this very problem.
Are you actually trying to say that the Conservatives haven't had turmoil on their benches? Yeah. We've had 4 Prime Ministers in the last 3 years.
All right, Andrew, just briefly, because we're going to move on. We're going to move on. But are you disappointed he's left the party, Owen Jones?
I'm always disappointed when everybody leaves the party.
And are you
I love
worried
Owen.
I
wish he was in the party, but he's not.
That was it. That was the question to Angela, not for you to respond, because Angela just said she's missing you already. And are you worried about Jeremy Corbyn?
Not so much after today.
Jeremy Corbyn, are you worried about him standing again?
No.
Let's talk about this. Daily Mail. Ministers to ban schools from teaching sex education to children aged under 9, with teachers urged to tell pupils that gender ideology is a contested belief. It's the story that the government has finally published draft guidelines and guidance on sex education in England schools today. As you see there, it's banning the teaching of sex education to children under 9. Let's have a listen to the Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan.
On teaching about gender reassignment, many schools have told us that they need clear guidance to help them teach about this highly sensitive, complex issue in a factual and safe way. We are making it absolutely clear that the contested topic of gender identity should not be taught in schools at any age. Schools should not be providing classroom materials that, for example, include the view that gender is a spectrum. Whilst protected characteristics such as gender reassignment should be taught, they must be done so on a factual basis at an appropriate age and not based on contested ideology.
Well, I asked the BBC's education correspondent, Elaine Dunkley, what that means.
Well, this is a relatively new area for teachers to have to deal with, and the guidance today strongly states that lessons about gender identity will be banned. It says that the idea that children can adopt different pronouns and the concept that someone's gender may be different to their biological sex is highly contested, and teachers should stick to teaching facts about biological sex. This is a very tricky area, and the guidance suggests that the teaching of gender identity is leading to confusion amongst some teachers, amongst some pupils. And so the government has said that it shouldn't be taught as a theory that is discussed. It should only be taught in terms of facts. The Education Secretary, Gillian Keegan, says that she has seen evidence herself, examples, that children in primary school have been taught things about multiple genders, and it's leading to children being confused. Now, the government says, in light of the CAS review, it's important that schools take a cautious approach to teaching about this sensitive topic and do not use any materials that present contested views as fact, including the view that gender is a spectrum. And this is in line with the Department for Education's gender questioning guidance, which also takes a cautious approach. Now, teachers have asked for clarity on this issue, but just because this guidance has been issued, it doesn't mean that those children who may have struggles around their identity are suddenly going to disappear. And so teachers are asking, well, what should we do when a child wants to discuss these issues, and what consequences will there be for teachers if they do discuss these issues?
Well, that was Elaine Dunkley, my colleague, and Gillian Keegan speaking in the Commons, I think, a short while ago. James, first of all, why was this guidance necessary?
I think the evidence is very clear that the kids themselves are deeply confused. The Children's Commissioner report spoke to 320,000 children, and their degree of mental health challenges and genuine confusion amongst pupils about these kinds of issues, about particularly sex education, is really profound. It also spoke about mobile phones, access to pornography, and the whole turmoil that young kids face nowadays in talking about sex. These are conversations that should really be having with parents at a young age, not solely in schools. So I think these are very sensible measures, and parents will be very relieved to hear them.
Do you welcome them? No sex education under the age of 9? I'm not sure there was that much sex education going to kids on time, but anyway.
I don't think there was.
OK.
I mean, the first thing to say is we have to look at what's happening here in the process. The government have been going to come up with these guidelines for months and months.
Yeah.
They've left no support or guidance for teachers. And what happens, 2 days ago, they are spun to all the right-wing papers. So we've had 2 days of ridiculous
but
headlines.
let's talk about the substance.
No, but you have to look at what's going on here. People are being used
lot
as
of evidence.
pawns in the culture war.
Okay.
So it could have been done better.
It's been a great evidence-building
thing,
exercise.
I think the important thing, well, I wish that they'd have, but I haven't seen the
been
guidelines.
published.
No, it's been published while we've been on air.
No, the evidence has been published.
I tried to get, the guidelines haven't been published. I haven't been able to read them before coming on here, so I can only rely on various bits of spin. The key thing, though, is it's got to be age appropriate. It's got to be thinking about having the child and the interest of the child at heart. It's important, despite all of the moral panic about trans people, that we acknowledge that trans people exist and they have rights in law, and they have the right to be treated with respect and dignity.
Yeah.
That's an important part as well.
Well, can I just pick up on that?
Yeah.
On that with Lucy and Owen? Because this phrase, the guidance makes clear that the concept of gender identity, what you've been saying, the sense of a person may have of their own gender, whether male, female, or a number of other categories, is highly contested and shouldn't be taught. What do you think that means? I mean, Angela has just said it's recognised in law, and now we have guidance saying it's highly contested.
But it is highly contested. I mean, the NHS has also brought out their own guidance on this about, dividing into, genders and sex in their own departments. So the idea that it isn't contested is not true. The very fact we're even debating it now says it's contested. And I think I'm really surprised that it's got to this point, because in schools, teachers should not be imposing their own personal beliefs and their own ideas onto children. And these are political beliefs because they are contested. And if it is contested, then this is a political belief.
It is a fact that trans people exist.
That
it is
is
a fact
true.
that people
That is
change
true,
and
but
transition
that's not a
in terms of their
contested
gender
belief.
identity.
But
Well, let Owen finish, I'll come back.
Look, I grew up into Section 28. I was a closeted gay teenager, and
So just say that Clause
Section
28
what it did is it
prohibited the promotion of homosexuality by local authorities.
In practice, that meant there was no teaching on LGBTQ education whatsoever. Margaret Thatcher introduced that, saying that children are being taught they have an inalienable right to be gay. That's what she said. And there was this idea of contagion, that by being taught about gay people existing, that would turn children
we'd
gay.
multiply.
Now, what that actually meant in practice, growing up, if you grow up LGBTQ when you're young, it is terrifying. And if you don't have education, something else fills the vacuum. You hear what other people say. Now, that might be other people being supportive, but it might be other people saying very ignorant things.
And do you think this is the same moment for
absolutely,
trans people?
And the other thing that really worries me, when Cami Badenoch, she says it really angered me. What she said was, in support of the idea if someone changes their gender presentation, then their parents have to be told. She said because nobody loves their children more than their parents. Now, in some cases, that's true. But that's not true in some cases. Some parents are abusers, and in terms of LGBTQ people, all LGBTQ people know. Just quickly, all LGBTQ people know lives of their friends who've been ruined by their parents because they failed to accept.
I'm really sorry, but children are not the property of the state. You do not get a right as the state to come in and intervene between a child and a parent relationship in this way.
Even if they're abusive.
We're not talking about a very specific instance. You are. I'm not. I'm talking generally about this topic. I'm saying that you cannot go into a parent-child relationship and take the power away from a parent and decide on their behalf.
It isn't.
It's completely inappropriate. And I think we have to start putting up barriers as to what teachers can and cannot say to our children. As a young woman who has grown up into a state school system, I also know what it's like having to deal with my identity as a woman. And I think we should be protecting women. And that is precisely what I think this government is trying to do.
No. Again, what we're talking about here, no one's saying that.
You're talking about.
Nobody's hold on.
Different.
Nobody's saying that parents shouldn't have a role and the state will take over. We're saying that, firstly, you shouldn't out children to their parents regardless of the circumstances.
I'm sorry, but the parent is the main guardian. The teacher is not.
Okay,
they are the person who.
Don't talk over each other. It's
that
very
many
hard for the
LGBTQ people grow up with parents who are homophobic, anti-LGBTQ, and that has a lifelong damaging consequence for them. Do you accept that or not? That's a straightforward question.
No, the point is here, and it's not what you're setting out here. It's about who gets the ultimate say Is it the parent or is it the state?
But
that is the question.
But Owen,
What do
can
you
we
mean by
focus on what is being proposed in this guidance and whether it is fair to trans people? Because there's been a change in tone, let me put it that way, as well as language. And actually, the Clause 28 moment, Peter Carl, the Labour MP, also said he was growing up as a gay man when that was in place, and he said he felt that the government was against him at that time. And we didn't get the chance to ask him yesterday how would he feel, but we've got Owen here to say the same. How does it feel for trans people? You think it will have the same sort of impact?
I mean, to be honest, I think that the hostility towards trans people that there's been in the debate recently has increased the number of hate-filled attacks that trans people have faced. And by the way, there's been a big increase in attacks on LGBT people in general. They face that on the street. And if you think that the government doesn't understand the way you are and is ridiculing you, which some members of the government have been doing, then that is very, very difficult. But that is not what this should be about.
No.
This is about teaching sex and relationship education at an appropriate, age-appropriate level in our schools to support all children, regardless of whether they're growing up LGBT or not, making certain that they can adjust to life as it is, to deal with some of the dangers online that Lord Bethel has been talking about, and understanding that if they're not given proper information at school, they will get it from somewhere else.
Right, okay.
There are now large percentages of girls who think they should be hit by their boyfriends.
Let James
respond. I think that, listen, I agree. You put that very well. But the decision about when it is appropriate should be made by the parent, not by the school.
Well,
and that is a fundamental right of parents.
Well, I think the guidance has got some view on that.
The Cash Review gave some very, very vivid examples of where schools had got spun out of control. And I don't think I think these are edge cases, and I'm not saying that the whole system is wrong. Most schools are doing a really great job, but the schools themselves have asked for clarity. Parents are very clear that they're unhappy, and the kids. We have a massive... Hold on, Owen, enough. We've had a very, very clear signal from the children themselves that they are not happy with being bombarded with sexual imagery online, with being taken too quickly through the education. I don't think
anyone would disagree with that. It's got to be age appropriate.
But do you accept that the debate? Do you accept that the debate has changed within Labour? Wes Streeting, a gay man, Shadow Health Secretary, saying that once he saw the Cass review, the Hillary Cass review into NHS gender care, and she brought up all sorts of grievances and problems, said it had been under-researched, he changed his mind in terms of his approach.
I think that the Cash Review and the issue about gender clinics is a completely different thing that you shouldn't connect. You shouldn't connect up to this.
Yes.
That's the first thing to say. That's the first thing to say.
Except that he said that people like himself, leading figures, were part of the decades-long problem of silencing any critic of the sweeping transgender debate. He said absolutely, and he said now that he blew all of that out of proportion. He's changed his view when it comes to discussion.
Wes Streeting is completely unrepresentative, I can assure you, of where LGBTQ people stand on this. Look, the point is that at the moment, if you are a trans child, you live in a society where your government is constantly whipping up bile for cultural reasons, where the media is portraying, just as gay people were portrayed, sexual predators, mentally ill, threats to children. The same songs are being sung that has a very damaging impact. And I'm sorry to hear on national television saying that in all circumstances parents should have the final say, when there are parents in this country who think being gay is evil.
All right, but we want to talk about the impact of this guidance. Why, listening to everything you've heard, why do you think it needs to change so quite dramatically?
I think there's a vulnerability of children, and they're very impressionable. I think that there are teachers who have very specific opinions and very strong opinions, like Owen, who want to sort of prescribe their own personal opinions, and I think that's wrong. I think they should be developing and having a childhood.
We didn't even have time for immigration. That just shows you what the panel was like in a good way. I'll be back next week. Bye.